Hey LeGrand Alive, this is Coffee with Will, brought to you by Northwest Furniture and Mattress, Grand Ronde Hospital, Anything to Digital, EONI, Valley Realty, Country Financial, and Schwab Tire. And today I am here with Grant Turner, who is the head of the local Shakespeare Troupe, and I believe he's also playing in the upcoming production of Much Ado About Nothing. So thank you so much for joining me here today,
Sure.
Grant.
Thank you.
So go ahead and tell me, first of all, now you're an EOU graduate, somewhat. You're an EOU student,
Yes.
and you've left for a while to go to Portland, but then you came back to start the Grande Shakespeare Troupe. Tell me, why did you do that?
So what I would only clarify you, I would say I am an Eastern Oregon State College attendee, not an Eastern Oregon University attendee. I don't even know when that happened.
I think it was the late 90s that they shifted
I
it.
left in 92, so it was after me.
Now don't date yourself on the show. That's important. I never do. I'm like 65 and they think I'm 26.
So I went to school here, 88 to 92. I took all 4 years. I amassed a number of credits. I still had like 10 science credits that I needed to take. And back then you needed to take them in a series. So you would take like Geology 101, Geology 201, and Geology 301.
Yeah.
You couldn't do one class of chemistry, one class of geology, and one class of something else. They had to be in a series.
Yeah.
So that sort of limited me. And plus I hated science. No offense
Fair
to
enough.
any scientists out there. So as a result, I kept putting them off and putting them off. I went through my 4th year. That summer, I decided to head home, thinking that I would come back my 5th year and just pick up those science credits and be done.
Yeah.
On a whim, I decided to audition for a play in Portland, my hometown. It was a production of Sticks and Bones by a guy named David Rabe. It's a great play, Vietnam-era play, quirky, odd. One of those awesome 70s plays that make no sense now in the 21st century. But,
like pretty much everything else in the 70s.
It looked cool, and I didn't think I'd had any chance to get in it, but I thought, what the heck, I'll take a swing at it, because flexing my audition muscles at the very least.
Sure.
And I auditioned and I got cast, and
Wow.
I thought, well, all right, well, I suppose I'll miss my first term, but then I'll go back at that point. But back then in Portland, you could sort of get your foot in the door like that, and then you sort of worked your way up as sort of a journeyman, in which I did. And so I just never quite got back to school. And so then I was in Portland for decades, and around 1999, I sort of decided that there really wasn't anyone doing theater the way that I was wanting it to be done. That sounds pretentious for me to say, but Shakespeare in particular tends to get sort of overproduced, I think.
Yeah.
Let's set Hamlet in the Wild West, or let's do
it's kind of gimmicky.
Came into the Shrew in Space, that kind of thing. And I always thought that the language was difficult enough without layering on an additional complication. So maybe it would make more sense to just simplify it and tell a story in a straightforward way. So I started my own company with, some chewing gum and some, duct tape and a piece of string, and we tied it all together.
The good foundational materials of any indie, venture.
So we made it work. I think I'd say the first 5 years they were probably terrible productions, but they were productions. We put shows on. We got experience, and we learned from our mistakes, and we got better each time. And then slowly but surely, we sort of established a theater company. It was called the Northwest Classical Theater Company, that began to develop a reputation for doing simple, honest, straightforward productions of Shakespeare in an intimate setting. And then we sort of exploded, and for a brief time, we were sort of the hip young theater in Portland. And then I kind of hit a wall. There really wasn't anywhere else for me to go at that time. I was in a small space, so I couldn't expand my audience base. I had reached out and I had worked with some amazing people, not only locally, but regionally, internationally even.
Yeah.
I'd actually brought out a director from the UK, brought out 2 directors from the UK who were former directors at the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Wow.
So, we were working with some top-notch talent. And it suddenly just became clear that I wasn't going to be able to exceed any of that. Met my summit, if you will. And,
at least in that particular mountain
Exactly,
range.
exactly. And then, as I was scratching my head trying to figure out how artistically I could be challenged ever again, my wife got a job offer to come out here to LeGrand.
Wow.
So it wasn't, I didn't choose to move here. I don't know that I would have moved here. I probably would have just continued to struggle and stumble in Portland. But the opportunity came up and I said, well, you know, I don't think I could live in any small town, but I do think I could live in LeGrand because having gone here, before, I knew it pretty well. We came out to visit, and I actually found that it was, a much more enlightened, much more progressive city than I recall it being. Than, the
1992.
And so I was really quite pleased. Within a matter of days, I realized that I'd made the right decision for me. And then, a leopard can't change its spots. So I had been running a theater company for close to 15 years, and I just didn't know what else to do. So I said, well, I could either sit idly on my hands or I could run a theater company here.
And so you decided.
So I reached out to Kevin Cahill, who I went to, when I was in school here in the 80s, he and I worked together several times up at the college. He was a big actor back then. He was the first guy I reached out to. And I said, I'm moving to LeGrand. I need you. Otherwise, this whole thing falls apart. And he said, great. It just so happens I'm looking for an artistic challenge. So he came on board. And then I wrote the college, and I wrote an EOU theater alumni Facebook page, and I put something in the newspaper, and I just said, I'm coming. I would like to meet anybody and everybody that's interested in sort of going on this journey with me.
Wow.
And that's sort of how people started to flock.
Got connected.
So,
yeah. So since then, you have done 12 plays in LeGrand, including Titus Andronicus, King Lear, Henry V, All's Well That Ends Well, from the Shakespeare comedies to the tragedies to the romances, and even into some that kind of don't fit in any of those, like The Tempest. You've done a lot since you've been here. And you mentioned earlier that you really appreciate the simplicity of, you like putting on simple Shakespeare plays. What do you think that simplicity brings to Shakespeare that maybe something that's a little bit more gaudy wouldn't?
Well, when I say simplicity, I ultimately just mean accessibility. It is important that an audience understands the words that are coming out of a Shakespearean actor's mouth. And that seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how quickly that is forgotten.
No, absolutely.
An actor in today's generation goes through years of training, and they are great at what they do. But the toolbox required to perform in a 21st century play and the toolbox required to perform in a 16th century play are vastly different toolboxes.
Absolutely.
And they don't often get a chance to flex their muscle in a Shakespearean play. So what often happens 9 times out of 10 with a less experienced Shakespearean actor is that they tend to emote and work very hard on sort of carrying you through the emotional journey and not the intellectual journey. And Shakespeare really requires you to balance both sides of that. A director who I greatly admire, who is probably the greatest director I've ever had the experience of working with, put it this way. He said, I don't want to know what you're feeling, I want to know what you're thinking as an actor. And if I know what you're thinking, I will therefore know what you're feeling. If I just play mad, there is a general wash to anger. And it can be any number of things, but it isn't specific, it's just mad. If I play, I am thinking that my wife has cheated on me, and I play that through line very clearly and deliberately, then you'll know I'm mad and you'll know why I'm mad. So you actually sort of kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
That's interesting.
With that approach.
A lot of times people approach it from, you have to, theater is very much about emotion. It's about that kind of stuff. But you've kind of taken it and said, okay, what's the foundational thoughts behind what this person is feeling at this time?
So, so again, the average actor would crack open a script. He would get a feel for what was happening. He would understand emotionally what his journey was. And then he would just get up on stage and start tearing into it.
Acting angry, or acting sad, or acting, happy, or whatever.
So what I like to do is I like to go through the script and I like to break it down very specifically and say, well, why do you say that word instead of this word? Why do you say gigantic instead of big? Why do you say, I adore you instead of I love you? Let's pick out what these words mean and why we say them, and let's give them a specificity and an intention. Really, you just go through the script and you find as many clues as you can, and you sort of tie all that together, and then that tells you who you are. So let me give you an example. Like, we'll say Hamlet, who is sort of famous for being this melancholy Dane.
Yeah.
If one wanted to, one could, without reading the script, could approach the play and say, okay, I'm a sad guy, I'm a melancholy guy, here I go. And they would start at the top of the play, and they would play sad, and they'd play maudlin, and
they just go through all the words with that emotion.
And they would do what they think Hamlet is supposed to be. But I think Shakespeare is much more multifaceted than that, and I think Shakespeare gets that human beings are more multifaceted than that. And there are moments in Hamlet where Hamlet is brilliantly funny. There are moments in Hamlet where he feels absolute delight and joy. Sometimes he's angry. Sometimes Hamlet is a horrible human being. He's not always,
he's not always pitiful.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes he's downright vile.
And so what you need to do is you need to sort of examine each scene for what it is. You need to understand what's being asked of you in each scene. You need to understand how to share that information with an audience. And then you knit all that together when you're done, and that is who Hamlet is. Hamlet is this multifaceted person that has all sorts of mood swings, just like we do in our everyday life.
Now, so it all kind of goes back to the words for you, really understanding the words that Shakespeare has put on the page and doing those justice.
Well, not only that, but Shakespeare writes, he very clearly gives you hints at what he wants you to do. What I think is great about Shakespeare is that he'll give you a myriad of clues throughout the text to sort of encourage you to make a choice. But he very rarely tells you what choice to make.
He rarely says, this person stabbed this person, or this person runs out and then comes back.
So actors get stymied sometimes by Shakespeare because they think Shakespeare is going to, it's too pat, it's too formulaic. I know what I have to do, I'm just going to do Shakespeare's stuff, and it's boring and it doesn't challenge me as an actor. I totally disagree. I think it's the opposite. I think he just gives you nothing but hints and clues and suggestions, and then your actorly imagination can fire off of that and do whatever you really want to do. So as you go through the script, you'll find things like, his most famous thing is tricks that he uses, the literative trick that he uses the most is antithesis. So he sort of sets one idea against another idea, to be or not to be. So you're setting the idea of living versus not living against one another. And you could say to be or not to be, that is the question. And I can play sad, and you get, oh, that guy over there's upset. But I can also, very clearly punch up the two options, to be or not to be. That is the question. And just by punching up that, antithetical debate, the idea that Hamlet is trying to express becomes that much more clear. So again, as opposed to just playing a sentiment, I can play an argument, and the argument becomes easier to follow, and thereby my emotion becomes easier to follow.
Very cool.
Does that make sense?
That does make sense, yeah.
That was a very quick sort of way to express that.
No, it kind of all comes down to, you would rather spend more time on understanding the subtleties of the language and the emotions and the thoughts of Shakespeare rather than putting all your effort into gaudy sets and weird, quirky ways of doing those kinds of things.
That sort of thing oftentimes gets in the way. I mean, that's not to say that I do all of my plays in an Elizabethan setting, because I don't. I always try to find the environment that makes the most sense. So, for example, we'll use Hamlet as sort of the ongoing template. So we're doing a production of Hamlet, and I want to create a world where the audience still understands the hierarchy of a king and a queen, because we don't have that in the 21st century in our country, so we need to understand exactly what that is. In the Elizabethan era, they didn't wear uniforms when they were in the military, and Hamlet is a very militaristic play.
Sure.
So I didn't want to set it in the Elizabethan era because it would be hard to know who were soldiers and who were, your everyday average Denmark Denzians.
Yeah.
So I wanted to find a time period in which costume could help clarify where we were and who we were, as opposed to muddy that situation. I was using a lot of women in what are traditionally male roles. Particularly, I used the female to play Guildenstern, who was a fellow student of Hamlet's. So we needed to find a time frame in which women were beginning to be accepted into sort of these elite all-male schools. So there are a lot of challenges that one faces, again, that are textually driven. But at the same time, the classic is the play ends in a sword fight. And we just don't sword fight in the 21st century, And so so I didn't want to do it as a modern play, because then suddenly everyone says, well, that doesn't work.
Or then suddenly you have, see my sword pulling out gold-plated, gold-plated 50 caliber pistols, and everyone's like, okay.
Exactly. Yeah. You can only stretch the metaphor so far. So I use the language and the requirements of the text to sort of inform where we'll be. So I guess that, to answer your question, I'm always about the language.
It's about the language.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that when you returned to Le Grand, you thought, oh, well, maybe I won't. You were kind of thinking, well, maybe this place is a little bit podunk and it won't really be a good place for a Shakespeare troupe. But you found otherwise someplace that was very open to a Shakespeare troupe, and someplace that was encouraging of that. And you said you've had some successes here.
So I would correct you. I would
Please
never say that I.
Maybe podunk is the wrong word.
I did not think that Le Grand wouldn't support a Shakespeare company, but even in Portland, it's very hard. I would say universally, it's very hard to find 15 Shakespearean actors who are strong in their training.
Sure, absolutely.
Anywhere you go. And all of Shakespeare's plays are 15 people.
Yeah.
So I was
really
concerned.
Is that true? Yeah. Every single one is 15 people?
At least 15
at least 15. Okay, I was like,
no, he's not that mathematically concerned. But there was it was a challenge that was endemic of just our theatrical
desires
in the 21st century. Yeah. So it wasn't any knock on Le Grand. But I was worried that I wasn't going to find, who's going to be my female ingenue, who's going to be my, grumpy old man, who's going to play all of the Macbeths or the buff military leaders that Shakespeare requires. So there were certainly types that I didn't know that I was going to have, and I wasn't sure exactly how we were going to fill those. But I had that first meeting with a bunch of people, and Israel Bloodgood was there not long after I met with Bryn McLaughlin. So the gang started to form fairly quickly, and a lot of them have stayed on. Israel has since gone to Portland. God bless him.
But you do have a very close-knit
group. But we have a good group of people, and Rose, who was the lead in the first play we did, All's Well That Ends Well, is the lead in Much Ado About Nothing. So, I've managed to hold on to a good portion of them, and the people I've lost really have just gone on to other things. They haven't sort of thrown a tomato at me and walked away. They've moved to other towns. So.
Fair enough. So you just mentioned our next play, Much Ado About Nothing. What is it? What is it going to be? How's it going to be the same as what you've brought before? How's it going to be different? Talk to me a little bit about the play.
Well, I think Shakespeare's plays sometimes have quaint titles. As You Like It, All's Well That Ends Well. The subtitle to Twelfth Night is As You Will. Just non sequitur generic titles that really don't mean anything. Comedy of Errors. I think Much Ado About Nothing on the surface is akin to all of those other titles, but actually is a brilliant title for this particular play because it really is a big furor over something that is all a lie, all a falsehood, and isn't really true. And when all is said and done, when one stops being petty and overreacting, and when one stops taking things probably more personally than they need to, one realizes that there are very few things that should cause you such an uproar. So in this particular story, there's a young man named Claudio who is in love with a girl named Hero, and he is led to believe falsely that she has been untrue to him. And it basically sets the play in motion from there. He's young and he's naive and he's never told anyone he's loved them before. So he makes some pretty awful mistakes, I think. The challenge to this play is trying to then reconcile the audience's reaction to his awful pettiness to wanting them to reconcile at the end, you know, he and Hero to get back together. But I think we've cracked that nut. Jake, who's playing Claudio, is a very sympathetic young man, which helps. So yeah, I mean, the play itself is really quite simple. I'm convinced that I will backtrack a little bit and I will say I've done this play 4, if not 5 times. I've seen it from many different perspectives. I've acted in it where somebody else has directed. I've directed where I haven't been in it, and I've sort of directed and acted a couple of times as well. So I know the play pretty well, and I know sort of the ways to approach this play. For a long time, I wasn't a huge fan of this play because part of the problem with this play, as I said, is it is rather trite, unlike Twelfth Night or As You Like It, which were comedies written at roughly the same time, which I believe have a bit more of an air of melancholy about them, which brings a bit more depth to them, I think. This play is also written primarily in prose, which is, you know, poetry, I suppose, but it's poetry without any structure.
Versus line breaks,
versus most of Shakespeare, or at least 70% of Shakespeare, which is in a very strict iambic pentameter verse. So I sort of feel like Shakespeare dashed this play off rather quickly. It doesn't have the gravity of some of the other comedies. The subplot, which is Beatrice and Benedict, you know, an older, I'll say that and Rose and Liberty will kill me, but an older couple who have decided
they hate each
that,
other.
well, not only that they hate each other, but that neither of them will ever be in love with anyone because that's just not the way they play. And then they get tricked as well. Everybody gets tricked in this play. They get tricked into this play into thinking that the other might have feelings for them, and then that warms their hearts and they start to explore, you know, their relationship.
There's a lot of deception that happens in the romances of Shakespeare.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, you know, so usually in the like Twelfth Night or As You Like It, it's cross-dressing. So it's women dressing as men, blah blah blah. Here it's just people telling lies or people, you know, pulling the other person along down a path they want them to go. So I feel like the subplot of Much Ado tends to overshadow the main plots. But then the subplot itself is also kind of strange because we sort of follow Beatrice and Benedict quite a bit, and then the second half of the play they sort of drop off for a while before they come back. And when they come back, they seem to have gone through some transformation, but we weren't privy to what happened. So I feel like it's a weird play. And I feel like it doesn't have sort of the structural perfection of a play like Twelfth Night. But I've since really grown fond of this play. That's anyone who heard me say I didn't like this play. Hopefully, you stayed around long enough to hear me say that I do like the play, because I do like the play. I've actually grown quite fond of it, and that's just because I've lived it enough times. I've been in it so many times, and I've directed it enough times that I've figured it out. It's finding that balance, finding that we want to believe that Claudio's heart is broken, but we also don't want to hate Claudio.
Yeah.
We want to find Beatrice and Benedict funny, but we also don't want to find them annoying. And you don't want Benedict to be a buffoon. You want him to be lovable. We've had a lot of success, I think, with this current company and sort of figuring out exactly what this play, where it needs to be, and what the tenor of this play needs to be.
So we're kind of running out of time here. So last question for you. We've talked a lot about accessibility and simplicity and bringing Shakespeare to a level where people do understand the words. What is maybe one or two suggestions that you could tell the audience, or just tell me and the audience will listen, about how to enjoy Shakespeare more, maybe through accessibility, through simplicity?
Well, the obvious one is just accepting the fact that these are plays, and yes, they are collected in a body of work. Yes, you read them in high school and in college literature classes, but they're not meant to be read. So you should watch professionals tell these stories. At the very least, you should read them aloud. Because they're not meant for the page. They are meant for the stage. Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming in. Now, Much Ado About Nothing is this weekend, Friday and Saturday. What is today?
Friday the 27th.
27th, and then also the following weekend, and it is at Looking Glass Books, so you can go see it there. And
so it's Friday and Saturday at 7, Sunday at 2.
Sunday at 2, perfect. So be sure to get your tickets and check it out. And so thank you so much, Grant, for coming in and chatting with me and sharing this stuff with me. I know that we could talk about this stuff all day long. And thank you, Le Grand Alive, for tuning in. This was brought to you by Northwest Furniture and Mattress, Grand Ronde Hospital, Anything Digital, EONI, Valley Realty, Country Financial, and Schwab Tires. Please, if you've enjoyed this interview, like it and share it, and tune into legrandalive.tv for more local content. I'm Will Bowman.